Started yet? We're going to do a mailbag, talk about the best moments of the last season. Let's talk some Chiefs, guys. Welcome to the Chief of the North and RGR Football. I am Seth Kaiser, a Minnesota Chiefs fan, the Chief in the North, the man who is always willing to try to work on his intros to stop cutting himself off, and the man who loves peanut butter powered by Scooters Coffee. There's a free one for you, Scooters. We are here like we are every week to talk about some of your questions regarding the Kansas City Chiefs. Every week you guys send some great questions. We've got some good ones, both from the comment section last week. We got a couple there that I really like, and then we got some on Twitter. And I want to talk to you guys about some of the stuff that I'm doing on the Chief of the North newsletter right now, which is, of course, where I write about all things Chiefs and et cetera, et cetera. I can't imagine you watch this without at least being aware of that and maybe even subscribing to it. So here's what we're going to do today. We are going to look at your mailbag questions. And if I have some time left over, I want to talk about some of the best moments from last season, which is what I'm currently working on at the Chief of the North newsletter. And there's just a couple that are worth I'm just kind of pointing you in the direction of that. It's just a fun thing to look at. If you're interested in having mailbag questions answered, you can put them in below, put a question mark in front of them, and I'll give those priority. Otherwise, what I do is I'll issue a tweet. I will tweet. I'm old. I will tweet every Wednesday, asking for some mailbag questions. People, you're good enough to respond, and we go through those. So without further ado, let's drive right into it. I'm excited. Plus, I got to say without further ado, so life is good. All right. KL368 asks, this is the last week of OTAs. What have been your takeaways, standouts, and things you would like to see? I mean this in the nicest way possible. Literally nothing other than guys not being injured. OTAs are less meaningful than pre-pads training camp practices. And that is saying something. With OTAs, it's an opportunity for rookies to find out where to stand. It's an opportunity for them to line up in the right spot. Maybe just kind of figure out where everything is. And with veterans, it's a chance to shake off a little bit of rust, meet up with coaches, run through a few things. Maybe on a veteran team like the Chiefs, our team that's been together a while, do a pre-install. But without being in pads, these are not even, you couldn't even call them glorified practices. They really are just practice in the pure sense of the term. And this actually, one reason I like this question so much is because it allows me to kind of dive into something that people should always remember. Practices outside of pads are significantly less telling than practices with pads, which are significantly less telling than preseason games, which of course are way less telling than regular season games. The place you can find the most out about a player is in those preseason games, outside of regular season games, of course. But in those preseason games, you can at least look at one-on-one matchups, right? Against an opponent who's trying their best, who's putting their game tape on. You can't really this receiver had 7 catches for 82 yards and a touchdown. That doesn't necessarily mean anything. You might have been schemed open. Preseason's goofy like that. It's more about seeing what guys' traits are and how they perform against competition, especially on the lines. But even, with wide receivers against man coverage or cornerbacks executing man coverage, you can see play speed, that type of stuff. In padded practice, you can't even see all of that because you don't have them up against an opponent that is just trying to win. You don't necessarily know what they're working on. But with pads, those one-on-one matchups still matter. Whereas I won't even talk about offensive and defensive line. Everyone understands that in a non-padded practice, it just changes everything about the dynamic of what they're doing. So you can't really take much away from it. But people don't often realize that the same is very, very true with corners and receivers as well. And the reason that is with no pads, the practices are significantly less physical. And so that's why every year you have guys that have these dominant practices with no pads on. And then as soon as the pads come on, you see their names just kind of disappear. And it's not because they can't necessarily they can't handle press at the line or something like that. That's part of it. But that's all people seem to pay attention to when it comes to physicality and wide receivers, especially. But being able to run through contact and get to your spot and maintain your bounce, maintain your speed, be able to look for the ball while fighting through contact, and not just at the line of scrimmage, but along your route, at the stem of your route, as you're changing directions, all of those things. Those are wildly important for a wide receiver to be able to get open at the NFL level. If you can't get to your spot in a padded practice, you're not going to be able to do it in an NFL game. And that getting to your spot isn't nearly as tough in a non-padded practice because it's not nearly as physical. So that was a long road to a short thought, but it's something that kind of fascinates me when it comes to OTAs. The thing to take out of them, maybe occasionally they line up a starter somewhere where they don't think. But overall, these are as basic as it gets, and it's not going to tell you much about camp matchups or position battles or anything like that, or how guys will perform once the pads come on. And that kind of helps you fast forward then to like training camp, where I pay attention once the pads come on. Then you kind of see who's winning one-on-one matchups, and even those are kind of goofy. But padded practices tell you way more. Way more. The difference between padded practice and non-padded practice, I think, is in a way as much as it is between a padded practice and a preseason game. I think you can tell more. The non-padded practice, you just can't tell much from it. All right. Grayson Neely asks, after the season, do you think they will give Toney an extension? He is younger and doesn't have the ego Hill had. I would be shocked if Kadarius Toney didn't have the ego Hill has, just as a starting point. NFL wide receivers, they're big ego guys. And frankly, they should be. They're awesome at what they do. And Kadarius Toney has never been one to lack confidence. So I would say, I'm guessing, considering how much Tyreek Hill had accomplished at that point in his career, I would just call it realism about who he really was as a player. From everything I've heard, he was liked in the locker room. So, he didn't take less money to be with the Chiefs, but I can kind of understand that. Do I agree with everything he says in this podcast? No. Do I think he just says things? Yeah. But whomst among us has not? In terms of Kadarius Toney, I think they need to see him perform and stay healthy. He was a first-round pick, so there's no reason that they have to sign him to an extension after one healthy year. Let's say he has a healthy year. Let's say he blows it up. That would be arguably the worst time to extend him because you really need to see several seasons in a row. You want to see that consistency. So I don't think that they would go for an extension. Generally speaking, extensions after the third year are usually reserved for quarterbacks when you're talking about first-round picks, because you got to remember, they not only have 4 years, but they've got that fifth-year option. So I would be shocked if they did that. And so I'm guessing they'll let that rookie contract play out and then do the fifth-year option if things are going well, and then use that to negotiate. That's how I would do things if I were them. Let's move on to some of the Twitter questions. Our friend Cole at How About Those Chiefs asked me about frozen pizzas. I'm going to get to that sometime when I have a little more time on my hands. G Freddy Chiefs, or G Freddy _ Chiefs, my apologies, asks, should I be expecting a top 10 defense? Too late, by the way. People are very they're very excited about the Chiefs defense right now, and I can understand that. We talked about this a little bit last week. As things stand right now, the Chiefs, in theory, should have a better cornerback group than they did last year because everyone's had a year. It's not a bunch of rookies. And they were good last year. In theory, they should be better at the linebacker position as Bolton and Gay continue to develop, and Drew Tranquill, really underrated signing. Defensive line, there's some questions there in terms of depth, but I would argue that Charles Omenihu is a better pass rusher, especially from the interior, than anyone they've had next to Chris Jones for years. And then the idea is simply, okay, does Karlaftis take a small step forward or a big step forward or any step forward? That would be a big deal. Dana has gotten a little bit better every year he's been in the league. Maybe Joe Cullen can do some really cool things with Tershawn Wharton, similar to how he helped Colin Saunders. And so we'll see. The defensive line really kind of came into its own last year as the year went along, but they're missing a lot of snaps from Saunders, Dunlap, and Clark. They need someone to take some of those snaps along the edge. So that's going to matter. But if things go how they're kind of hoping they will in terms of that front, I think Brian Cook will slide into that safety role really well. And I'm curious if they use more 3 linebacker groupings as opposed to 3 safety groupings with Tranquill's ability in coverage. If things go, there's multiple paths to them being a good defense this year, not just an average defense or a below average defense. And the job that Steve Spagnuolo did last year really is kind of underrated by a lot of fans, particularly in the playoffs and the Super Bowl. We can talk all we want about, Mahomes having some heroic performances, Travis Kelce dragging the offense around. Anything is possible. All these moments, in the Bengals game, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, like some of these things. But it's worth noting that in both the divisional round and the AFC Championship, the defense really held back the opponent, particularly in the AFC Championship. 23 points was enough to win. And against a really good Bengals offense, that was an incredibly impressive performance by Spags. They sent a ton of stuff they didn't send at the Bengals in the regular season matchup. It was a lot of fun to watch. And in the Super Bowl, Spags actually did a killer job. It's just Jalen Hurts played the game of his life and made some incredible throws. There were some incredible catches by some of his receivers. You had a blown coverage here and there, but overall, they had to make incredible plays, and their run game never really got going. That was largely because of the game plan Spags put together that was just awesome. So it's worth noting that Spags has, generally speaking, I think, maximized overall the talent of the defense. And I do think this has the potential to be the most talented defense that he has. So there's a non-answer answer. WSMFP Chiefs asks, which wide receivers do you think may end up making the team and why? I think it's going to be basically chalk. I mean, I think you've got Tony, Moore, Rice. I can already tell I'm going to forget someone here. You obviously are going to have MVS. I think James and Watson are guys that are very likely to round it out. Who am I forgetting? That's obvious. I know it's someone, but I think it's going to be those last spots. People talk about Ross, and then you've got James Watson. You kind of got this little grouping there where I think the question marks really are. But I think by and large, the thing with the wide receiver room is they've got a lot of potential guys there, but they don't really have a lot of guys that they know much about outside of MVS and Tony with the asterisk when he's healthy. And so that's going to be a tough room to really read, honestly, until we get into the actual season. Hey, 2 non-answer answers in a row. Elon Muskie's briefs, Jeepers, people's Twitter names. What's your guess for Frank Clark's new contract when he signs? I don't think that the Chiefs, I've never seen them bring a guy back after doing the whole, so long farewell treatment, but I could see them doing it with Clark. I know they like him. He's just going to have to be willing to take like less than Dunlap did last year. It's going to have to be a mercenary role. And if they don't sign Frank, who's the best free agent to fill the role? I think Ngakoue is still available, and he would be a smart guy to bring on board if you need a guy that can eat 600 snaps, not be a weakness, and can help the pass rush a little bit. Is edge the largest hole or wide receiver 1? The wide receiver room scares me the most because I do like at least their first 4 in terms of pass rushers as of right now. When you're talking Jones, Amenihu, Karlaftis, and Mike Dana, I like that group. And depending on how FAU does coming out of the gate, I think that's a decent group as pass rushers. I'm curious, how Colburn does and, some of the moving pieces up front, but I kind of like the group they have there. I'm just worried about the depth there. And so I think it is wide receiver for me. G. Freddie Chiefs asked, should we add a veteran wide running back for depth? Not for depth. I'm comfortable with the depth that they have. If they want to try to upgrade on something, I could see that, but I think they're comfortable with Pacheco, McKinnon, Clyde. John Wesley said it's quite likely this year Tony may struggle with injuries and Moore may not make a huge leap as a second-year wide receiver. In that instance, MVS is wide receiver 1, and Justin Watson is then number 2. Is that a group to be confident in? Not really. And that's the problem. We've talked about this before. The ceiling for that group, if Moore makes a jump, if Rashee Rice is what they're hoping he is early on, if Tony stays healthy, that's a very talented group. It's just there's nothing proven there. And that's the really tough part. Derek Newson asks, do you see the offensive or defensive overall scheme change with the roster changes from last year? Every year, Andy Reid changes things up a little bit, but you're still going to see the same basic overall tenets. I just think you're going to see him leaning into a lot of the stuff that worked last year, but you're going to see some twists on that. I'm especially curious with a younger wide receiver room and a lot of tight ends that they like, if they lean even farther into 12 and 13 personnel. I think in terms of, I don't think Spags is going to change his scheme. I think he might change some personnel usage and become less of, like I said earlier, a 3 safety guy and keep 3 linebackers on the field more often. We know they like their linebackers, and adding a coverage backer like Tranquil makes a huge difference. He was a safety in college. That might allow you to get away with having him in that kind of hybrid role they've had Dan Sorensen in the past. Casey Kleeman asks, with quarterbacks making $50 million in some positions and players like Eckler can't get a $2 million raise, is there a way to fix this? What's the odds of the players union agreeing to a positional cap? I don't think there's a way to fix it. No. One problem that you're going to see, and you're going to see this pretty consistently, is for the NFL players union, at least, is that the NFL consists of way more players than you will see in, like, say, like the NBA Players Association. And the vast majority of them are not stars. And the vast majority of them are either average to below average starters or fringe roster guys, the vast majority. And so what you're going to see generally a big deal in their voting processes, because again, union reps have to be voted for, and they're going to push for what the majority of the union is trying to push for. Now, some of that is stuff that's good for stars, for sure. But the biggest things are going to be like, minimum veteran salaries, time off, that kind of stuff. That's the stuff you're going to see pushed for more heavily, I think. In terms of way to fix it, I think football itself will fix some of it, some of the ebbs and flows. The running game was more important last year than it had been in like the previous 3 or 4 years. Because more and more teams are going light boxes, too high shells, that kind of stuff. And so the run game suddenly starts to become a little more important again. The Chiefs being able to run the ball more effectively last year certainly helped. And so I think you'll see a little bit of course correctedness there. But honestly, it's just positional value is going to be a big, big deal. The one thing that could happen in theory is that more and more young players stop being running backs, and you see an influx of more and more talented wide receiver like we're seeing, and fewer really talented running backs. And so guys are able to differentiate themselves a little bit more. That might start to even things out a little bit along with some of the schematic stuff that you see kind of pendulum back and forth in the league. Another question from Elon Musk's briefs. Does Brian Cook's slower speed concern you if he's replacing Thornhill at free safety? Are we getting a new, less polished version of Sorensen? Cook is way faster than Sorensen on film. It's not even close. His closing speed is way better. Sorensen, it's worth noting, never really played Thornhill's role. He was always he was always doing again that hybrid linebacker stuff or part of a too high shell. I think Cook's play speed is just fine on field. It's not. His long speed isn't at quite as high level as Juan Thornhill's, but I don't think you're going to see him being asked to play a pure free safety spot or a single high guy as often as they did with Thornhill. And even with Thornhill, they weren't doing it a ton by the time you got to last year. So I think you're going to see him and Justin Reed trade that off sometimes. Both of them are guys who have done it, but that's not who they are purely. Brian Keedy asked, what does it mean to be YouTube commenter? Oh, just someone was snotty to me about an opinion I gave last week, which is fine. It was just a joke. I like everyone who comments on YouTube's. When people accuse me of, wow, you clearly don't watch the film because you have this opinion. Well, I don't think we need to go down the train of why that's a logical fallacy. Maybe I just don't agree with you. And so it was just a throwaway joke on what I meant by that, because YouTube is known for having occasional comments that perhaps get a little out of pocket, as the kids certainly no longer say. And we've got time for a few more, and then I have to get going for the day. Zila the Brotiku asks, feel free to answer either one of these questions. Chiefs related question. What do you realistically think Rice's production will be like his rookie year? I think Rice, there's such a clear role there for him in what Juju Smith-Schuster did last year. And so I think he's going to have a little more than what Sky Moore did coming in last year. And so I think I see him scraping away approximately 45 catches, 500 yards, which I think would be a very successful rookie season. We got time for a few more. G. Freddy Chiefs ask, is our wide receiver room better now than a year ago? No. Its potential is higher, but its floor is much lower. Losing a veteran guy like Juju Smith-Schuster and a veteran guy like McCole Hardman, who what you're getting there. And yeah, people can joke about jet sweeps and that kind of stuff, but he did contribute to the passing game as well in a proven way that we haven't seen consistently from any of the other guys besides MVS who are in-house. That's just worth noting. So, I mean, they could be, but they haven't necessarily shown that yet. I just want to make sure that I get everything. There be light asked, will there be another cold weather Super Bowl? If so, why not KCMO? I'd be surprised if they did it again, in an outdoor stadium. But if not, Arrowhead would be a whole lot of fun. It's just a matter of the stadium would probably need a renovation, that kind of stuff. All right, one more. They call him Tim Yajabroni. I asked, what happened to Times Ours? I missed the banter between you, Nate, and Josh. I miss it too. Josh has been on his honeymoon. He is back now, so we should be recording a new Times Ours next week. We of course, we all love talking, honest to goodness. We just love sitting there talking to each other when we record the show. And so we miss it as well. So we will get to that. Thank you guys for all your questions. I do just want to say one of the things that I really would urge you to check out on the Substack, which is the minnesotachiefsfan.substack.com. You can see all this stuff right here. Or bit.ly/Seth really hates money and all that fun stuff. Right now, we're going through the inarguable most fun moments of the season. Because there were so many great moments this last year, I actually had to write an entire article for honorable mentions. And so, like, beating down the 49ers and Andy Reid putting Nick Bosa in a torture chamber, MVS's big day. Do you remember this play? The arm stick out, MVS playing like a wide receiver one when they needed him most. Isaiah Pacheco being Tasmanian Devil, Aaron Mahomes. These are all honorable mentions, which tells you how fun this season was. And then I'm breaking down the most fun 12 moments, and we did moments 12 through 7. I just will do, number 12 was the Chiefs managing to score in just 12 seconds against the Bills, a moment that largely got lost in history, but certainly shouldn't have, because it was a really awesome moment where it was just kind of like reconfirmed that there really is no situation the Chiefs can't do what they need to do. All right, that's the time I have for you guys. I appreciate you as always. Make sure, again, to do all the like, subscribe, all the YouTube stuff. Ryan and the gang here, they work incredibly hard, and I'm here too. So thank you very much. I will see you guys next week. And in the meantime, I don't know if you've heard this, but it is a great, great week to be a Chiefs fan.